Any questions? Can we move on? Okay, good. Let's move on to the next slide. I have close to 14 slides. So I think with the time that we are going, I'm probably going into a lot of detail. While it is useful for all of us, I'm not sure if we need to spend that amount of time. So I will again attempt to brush through a little bit faster. The only risk I have is if I go through faster, probably you may not be able to get the essence of what I'm trying to say. But let's try it and see. So with more and more exposure to what's happening in our organization today, and with a lot of history that we have seen in the last 20 years, I don't need to probably tell you some of those, but just to refer here for us to understand what we're talking about, whether it is Enron, whether it is other frauds or misrepresentation or vested interest playing bigger role in some of the corporations not truly sticking to their core principles. There has been a larger need for governance, and this corporate governance has become an extremely important element. Today, organizations have separate functions, separate departments, separate qualified, experienced people with a team of, I would say, experts sitting and looking at how can we better represent ourselves to the outside world in terms of what are we doing, how do we bring the credibility, how do we bring in an element of respect so that our investors, our employees, the society, and everybody else understands what we're doing and why we're doing. And for us to do that, we need to definitely do certain things. So without getting into the detail, I think with Sarbanes-Oxley Act coming into 2002, post Enron, I think there has been a lot of focus from organizations, top brass, to focus on corporate social responsibility as well as corporate governance. The governance is more in terms of being transparent, visible, in order to basically be very explicit, to state what needs to be stated, to clearly have disclaimers of what you believe people should not misinterpret. And if you see the annual reports today, I mean, those days, I think when I grew up, the annual reports used to be a few pages, maybe 25, 30 pages. Today it runs beyond 100 pages. A lot of these beyond the routine items like the plans, the strategies, the progress made, both text as well as financials, and other narratives to what is happening in the company. There's a lot of focus on also telling people information that they need to know. It's not that they like to know, they need to know. And today, if you want to invest as an individual into a share market for any particular listed company, today, if you want to buy even a product as a customer, even if you have to buy a product for as less as 20 rupees or as high as 1 lakh rupees, I think the customer today definitely wants to know how things are done. What kind of company is this? What is the record they have? Have they done something that is unethical? Have they been indulging in practices that are impacting a section of society or impacting a group of, I would say, countries which are impoverished, or are they doing something that is affecting the environment today, and so many other things. So today, right from seeing different information on the label of any product, sometimes you wonder why they are telling you all these things, because in the past sometimes we never bothered to look at them, to declaring all this in an annual report, stating about it, doing a lot of campaigns on corporate social responsibility, trying to extend support to the society from where they're drawing people, they're drawing resources, they're taking land and facilities and so many different things. They definitely feel there is a need for them to bring in credibility. And there's a lot of discussion on this topic in the last 20 years about if business is for profit, it is only that they have to focus on. By getting into corporate governance, by spending money on corporate social responsibility, by trying to focus too much of effort and attention towards all the non-business areas, somewhere the stakeholders or the shareholders' interests are compromised. So if I'm a shareholder, I've invested money in the company and I want good returns. I want returns that will help me grow my wealth, will help me reinvest again, or probably refer more people to invest again. And as more and more investments a company gets, provided they have the right direction and strategy, it's always going to be useful for them to successfully gain a better market share. But if you look at the converse side of it, if I'm a shareholder and I see my company spending 20% of the money, efforts, attention, focus, purely to do things which are not the reason why I put the money, right? The question deeply comes out saying, why are you doing all this? What is the purpose of doing all this? So there's a lot of debate on this topic. I mean, it's not about what is right or wrong. It's all about what are you truly trying to do when you run a company. And that is where I think different companies have different stands. And some people explicitly say, some people do a lot of things but do not state it so much because they feel it is not required. End of the day, it is important for every organization to definitely focus on this, and it is happening today. It's happening today. If it is about blind foundation, if it is about health related, which is prevention of epidemics, if it is about environmental topics, if it is about anything else, you will always see an organization or a brand trying to make the best possible opportunity to market themselves. So you take the marathons, the runs, the campaigns, the blood donation camps, so many other things you see. Somewhere or the other, you see some organization trying to, of course, support a good initiative, but as a byproduct, by virtue of doing that, also earn a few credibility points in terms of the society on the whole. So long debate, but interestingly, this is something that is happening more and more. I think I would even say today a lot of good things are happening only because companies are getting involved. And you also see that in, though not exactly related to the CSR concept, but in sports as well, right? If you see the ISL today, football 20 years back, or even 10 years back, was unknown of. I mean, the whole country is cricket crazy. Football probably happens once in 4 years when all of us go and support a country that we have no idea about, purely because we like a few players. We've seen a few of them on the video or TV. Today we have players that are playing the soccer league. Today we have companies who are sponsoring them. Today I see we are making some footprint in the global stage. Looking at it, I see that we will definitely be at least in the qualifying round of the World Cup in the next maybe 8 or 12 years. Somewhere we will be in the top 50, probably in the next 10 or 12 years, which is a big sign, a big different sign than what we had in the past. So somewhere the corporates have been involved in so many things, of course for money, no doubt. By investing in IPL and ISL, they're not doing charity. We all know that. It is business of business and business of sports. There's no doubt about it. But I think somewhere because of the influence and the clout they have, I would see that the good side of the whole investment is about promoting certain very important sports that never been highlighted in the past, unfortunately, after so many years of being free. So let's moving on to the next topic, next slide. I mean, again, we'll not get into detail, but any questions so far? We're almost towards the end of the first hour, and possibly I've tried to cover things that we know, we understand, we've seen, we are able to relate to. Academically, there is a structure in which we are going through definitions, which we will do when we actually get into E1. But today we are talking only about, do I really understand a little bit about enterprise, organizations, the global context, what is happening in different cultures, where technology is playing a role, where am I placed here? Am I obsolete? Am I relevant? Am I up to date? Am I really outdated? And so on. Okay, can we move on? Okay, so quickly moving on, we will quickly cover now the different functions, and I'm assuming that some of you are working. So can I have a quick show of hands in terms of how many people are actually working right now or doing business versus purely being a student? So for me to probably use my examples differently for you to be useful. Can you just tell me working or student? Wonderful. Good. So I hope so far the examples or the instances or some references probably helped you a little bit, because I see at least 2 of the 3 are working. So let's move on to that. So the good news is that I don't have to spend too much of energy because you kind of know these functions, but I'll quickly touch upon each of these functions. So typically these functions are having certain objectives in mind. And in finance, we talk about finance. Finance guys usually are the most hated people in the organization. I'm a finance guy myself. So you can imagine someone like me or somebody doing a role of mine traditionally, who believes that he owns, or he's the custodian of what's happening with regards to money in the organization. So whether it is disbursing cash, paying salaries, buying equipments, paying money to put up a new office, the finance guys typically, traditionally I would say, are the people who are the most important people, or at least they seem themselves to be more important. Traditionally, it's always been the case that this function is normally at the end of everything that happens. So I mean, a lot of thoughts are put together to start something, buy something, and so on. And then finance comes in somewhere in the middle or towards the end and says, yeah, we need a budget, we need approval, we need to get some quotations, we need to ensure that we have adequate due diligence of, who we are buying from, is it credible, are there good organizations, are they providing warranty, and all that, stuff. So finance typically has financial accounting, management accounting, treasury, working capital, a lot of other functions. So I would broadly put finance into 3 major areas. One is financial accounting, which to me is like the 3 key functions of human life: food, clothing, shelter. So you need to have food, you need to have clothing, you need to have shelter, so that you're able to survive a basic, decent life. Now, it is extremely important, but at the same time, it is not the end of everything, as we know. So that's why we have something called, I would say, management accounting. And somewhere management accounting, treasury, working capital go together, because it's about managing funds, it's about managing information, it is about managing and reporting and providing visibility of what's happening. Because it's important, if you take the example of going from Delhi to Nagpur, if you don't know where you are, if you do not know how many kilometers you have to cover, probably you will run out of fuel, you run out of energy, you don't know if you're getting into a dark part of the day where you need to find an accommodation or find something to eat, and so on, many other things. So you need to always do a stage correction or a stage review. So that's what normally happens. I'm trying to put it very simple. Probably there is a lot of definitive explanations to it, but in simple terms, it's all about, are we able to manage, are we able to monitor, progressively look at what's happening? Do we have adequate information about funds? Do we know what is coming in? Do we have enough money collected from the customers? What are the payment obligations do we have? Who do we need to pay? When? What is the impact to the business? So can we pay somebody late? Can we pay employees early or late? Can we pay a vendor late or early? So many other decisions. Now, financial accounting and management accounting somewhere works closely as well. The only difference is that management accounting starts and treasury accounting runs parallel to financial accounting. And it's more of analysis, it's more of looking at the outside world, the customer, looking at how are you placed in terms of your cost structure, how are you placed in terms of your revenue streams. Are we able to give a sales guy or a marketing guy a visibility about where the orders are coming from, which customers are paying well, which products or services are giving you good margin? Because you have so much of wealth of information as a finance guy that you can actually define what needs to be done next. It's a different story that some may not be practical, some are purely a Microsoft Excel exercise, not something that can run in the market. However, it's important that the information or data we have can be utilized so well for the benefit of the organization. The last segment primarily looks at audit, compliance, governance, looks at secretarial startups, incorporation, maintenance, statutory requirements, a lot of outside world, inside company activities which are required for maintaining the hygiene of it. So if I take an example of the food, clothing, shelter for financial accounting, I would take an example of management accounting to be more of the enhancement side of it, whether you are qualified, whether you have a good health, whether you have a decent qualification, do you have a happy life, and so on. And all these compliance audit relations are more fundamental, or more, I would say, while the food, clothing, shelter are required for you to survive, the audit and the compliance are the very purpose of why you are here. So it's about we as a person, the purpose of we. So if you are not there, if certain basic things are not taken care, I mean, you do not exist as a human being, you don't exist as a company. So governments today, as I said when I was talking about governance and CSR and corporate governance, governments today, societies today are looking very keenly about each organization today. In fact, there are so many guidelines, I won't say restrictions, but guidelines to start any business, any part of the world, only to make sure that certain adverse or negative impact do not happen once the business starts. This was never the case in the past, because it was when somebody thought that they could make more money or sell better products or tap better manpower that they would start anywhere, anything. So typically that's primarily what happens in finance function. Now, interestingly, going on to the next slide, it has a very strong correlation to finance function. It talks about typically how transformation is happening today. Now, when we talk about finance, the finance that we know of, the finance that we are aware of. Just a minute. Sorry. So the finance that we are aware of, the way it is traditionally done, has undergone changes. So today we have this very interesting term called fintech. I don't know if you heard about it. These are companies, these are concepts which are now developed as products by companies, where finance is looked at differently. The way the finance functions operate with a customer or supplier, or even within the organization, is different. A lot of focus on automation, a lot of focus on trying to understand the source of information, and also trying to understand what the output of any activity should be. So today, finance teams or finance departments are always sitting with tons of data. While they mostly have finance data, they also have operational data. They also have data on, I would say, marketing, sales, no, though not directly. And what is happening is that in the next big revolution that is happening. So if I quickly go back and interestingly give you an anecdote of what it's been always about. In the past, I think the whole of 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, one of the most important crucial elements that the whole world was revolving around was oil. And right from wars to governments to policies to economic strength to organizations flourishing in a particular country which is oil rich, used to be based on the source of oil. Now, the next oil is data. If you look at the last 10 years, and if you look at what Google says, Google clearly says that, I mean, their primary mission is to organize world's information and make it available to all. In the last 10 years, as per what Google says, the amount of information that has been collected or created, not collected, created would be the right word, has not happened in the last 2000 years. So between the early 2000 and today, or maybe mid 2000 and today, what Google holds as data or database or big data, the way we see it, has been created in 10 years, in 10, 12 years. And that sums up the entire humanity versus what we must have created in 2000 plus years of human existence. So data is the most important thing. The forces for outsourcing and offshoring are pretty much started with finance. There was always offshoring of other functions or other industries. See, when we talk about BPO, people think BPOs came in the early 2000s or late 90s. But if you look at it, the fundamental concepts of BPO, which is economies of scale, low cost labor, and centralized manufacturing or production or activity, was always there in even the 70s and 80s. If you look at a lot of the companies in the world that had plants outside their home country, was also a benefit towards these three. If you take any company, if you take the automobile companies in the world, if you take the electronic manufacturing companies in the world, if you take the apparel industry in the world, Nike manufactured all their products 20-30 years back in countries like Africa, Bangladesh, India, and so on. Maybe they didn't have their own shop, maybe they were subcontracting or job work kind of a role, where they basically gave it to somebody from who they basically took it up, assembled, quality checked, whatever, and then they basically branded them as their products based on successful completion of the quality standards. So typically this is not something very new that we are seeing. It is just happening in areas other than manufacturing, which is where we're talking about business process. But the fundamental concepts of what works in an offshoring world has been there for at least a good 50-60 years today. A good 50-60 years. I would say right after the World War II in the 60s and 70s. So moving on to the transformation piece of finance, going to technology. So technology plays a role. Today we talked about artificial intelligence, we talked about machine learning, we talked about Internet of Things. We're talking about strong correlation between different technology elements. It is happening more and more. So in the olden days, IT or technology was a very small team of people, where they basically store information and give it to you when you need it. Today we live with IT. We live with everything that happens in IT. In fact, it is one of the most important drivers for organization. Today, it is not good that you have a good customer base. It is not good that you have a good segment of customers who see your product to be niche. It is important that you are in line with what a customer wants. A classic example again today is this particular medium that we are going through. Had, like any other company, if Saraf said that I would probably do only face-to-face classes, if people need to go, they can go to my nearest center, and we have same level of faculties and quality of content and so on. There are a lot of areas where people would prefer an online medium. So it's important whether you have a unique customer product or service. It's important to have, but I'm saying that it is not the only thing. You need to have the platform and the technology to be able to attract people who look at that as the most important factor. Today, it's not important that you're able to now log into a computer or to Amazon or a Flipkart and order. People prefer an application on their mobile which helps them track, which helps them order while they are going. They don't need a computer or laptop anymore. So everything around technology has become so competitive today that is the single most important factor for organizations to survive. So again, in terms of IT, we're talking about information technology, network systems, information systems, which is basically about how you collect, identify, collect, centralize, share, disseminate, or interpret information. Again, we're talking about implementation of various systems, ERPs, we're talking about SAP, Oracle, we're talking about cloud-based systems. So all the traditional ERPs or enterprise resource planning systems, which basically helped real-time collection of data and reporting of data, so that all departments in an organization, right from material planning to production, to finance, to marketing, to supply chain, are able to basically look at what's happening in the production line real-time in front of their computer. Now the whole technology is moving from a server base to a cloud base today. And there is no single organization in the IT space who is behind this. Every organization, right from SAP and Oracle and any other organizations, are indeed looking at how to use this technology for their customers and for their potential customers as well, who would be looking at this as an important factor. So moving on, so quickly into the next slide from technology. The information systems or the information powerhouse in terms of having a lot of these things is required today through various tools. So I mean, we are in a world where we have seen all this. I think examples will be more easier for us than anybody else who must have looked at it in the past. So we talked about cloud computing, we talked about e-business, a business sitting in front of an internet connected handheld or computer, literally talking to customers, ordering items, looking at a complaint or monitoring a performance, anything for that matter. Increasingly important has been the CRM as well, the customer relationship management, where we are basically looking at tapping the customer life cycle, looking at what typically happens in a customer life cycle. So how does a customer enter into an organization? What are his preferences? How many of us must have, for some reason in the past, thought that I would only go for this product? For example, I'm a hardcore Sony fan. I know Sony is not doing so well today, but I'm very hesitant to move away from a Sony product today. Simple reason is it has an aspirational or a intrinsic value for me, because the first product I bought 20 years back was a Sony product, and I always felt that whatever products that Sony sells is always has good quality, even if they may be a little more pricey. So with the advent of Samsung in electronics, or LG in household articles, or any other brands, I've stuck to Sony as much as possible. Now, the flip side of it is there are a lot of companies who are losing ground, right? But then there is an affinity that we have, and there is a reason why we have that affinity, and it becomes very difficult for us to move away from that. So typically a customer chooses a brand for various reasons. Maybe he bought it when he got his first job, maybe he bought it when he got married, maybe he bought it when probably he got a promotion, and so on. I'm sorry, I'm giving a man example. If you take a woman, probably when she went for her education on her own in a foreign country where she brought a first product. So there are different stages in human lives where we look at products, where we associate themselves with, and that's why it's important to look at customer relationship management. And that is where I'm saying that technology sometimes plays a role which is a little difficult, because technology keeps you away. You have a problem with a bank, you're not happy with a particular service, I can guarantee it will take at least 30 minutes before you talk to somebody from a bank. And those 30 minutes, you literally have to pray to God that the call doesn't drop, the menu doesn't change, your phone supports whatever the bank interactive voice recording system is asking for, and so on and so forth. So once upon a time, in an interview with a group of journalists close to 10 years back, I think Richard Branson, as you may know him as the head of the Virgin Group, a very interesting story if you look at what he did and how he came up with the company that he is today. He made a very clear statement that I'm talking about early 2000, when technology was becoming the most important factor for doing business. He made a very interesting statement that for companies, technology should not come between an organization and a customer. It is only good if it is an enabler. The moment it is in between, it is a barrier. That is a day when the customers will stop, or possibly consider technology to be a differentiating factor to go into a particular service. And this statement is very true even today. As I mentioned to you, if you want to reach somebody in a bank or some other company, you need to probably wait for a few minutes or sometimes an hour to get the right person, and still not sure whether the person will be able to help you with whatever your requirements are. So moving on to operations, again, we are looking at operations purely from a manufacturing or production related activity. Operations again is basically inputs, process, outputs. You have certain inputs, you perform certain activities, then there is a product which is in progress, and there is a finished goods, and then you sell it or store it, and then eventually the customer consumes it or uses it. Now, of course, Porter had defined a value chain. He called certain activities are primary and secondary, second activities are secondary. But fundamentally, Porter also re-emphasized the fact that every step in the value chain is only useful if it adds value. So when you say value, what is value? Value is all about, I buy a product for a cost X, correct? And the customer who is consuming it should see a value or a benefit from the product X. We know a product X can perform certain functions, but that does not necessarily make it a value addition. The value addition is only when customer pays for a product X but gets something X plus something in return. So it could be a feature, it could be a service, it could be a freebie at the time of purchase, it could be a added equipment or an accessory. So if you go in for a phone, probably they'll give you maybe a pen drive, maybe something else. So value chain is important because what differentiates companies is today the value, and it is perceived differently for different people. It doesn't have to be always a digital product or a service. It can be something that the company has marketed saying this will enhance the experience of a customer. It will help. So for example, if you take a product, if you take a phone, for example, there are phones where people now can log in using face recognition. Maybe a couple of years back, fingerprint. A few years back, maybe a pattern or a pin number. A few years back, simply a hard press of the star or the asterisk. So whether a customer looks at that as a value is purely with the customer. So if you get the new phone that is coming in, I'm sure you must have seen the ad of OnePlus 60. I don't know what it is. I think it's coming sometime in this month. It talks about unlocking the phone very differently. Now, some of us may not see it as a value. Some of us may see it as, how does it make a difference if I lock it this way or that way? Is it something that I truly want? Am I ready to pay a premium for it? Am I need to buy or change a phone just because I have certain functions that are very unique? It's purely a decision that is taken by a customer. And sometimes companies go wrong. What they think is value addition, what they think are unique features may not be perceived that way. So that is why you see some companies, despite doing a lot of these, finally does not find them so relevant. So it's important when you try and introduce something into a product, you're able to also assess the market and the customer to see whether it is something that the customers really want. Okay, so moving on to from operations into the next one, which is the tools techniques. So again, operations management is all about a series of tasks, activities through a system, through a platform that has a lot of constraints. What is a constraint? A constraint is a typical economics, I would say, parlance of limited means, unlimited wants. So you have certain constraints, you have certain restrictions or limitations, but you need to still achieve certain important objectives. So in operations, it is always about managing your constraints, managing your resources, managing your money or time or skill. I mean, everything is limited or reasonably limited. It's not unlimited for sure. And typically in operations management, it's all about planning and managing, planning, monitoring, management, assessing how things work, what doesn't work well, constantly looking at what needs to change, constantly observing the feedback from the production floor, from the customer, from the guys who are talking to the customer, the marketing or the sales guys, and so many other people. And it's also about understanding what can go wrong. It's also about understanding the way you are layout, you're understanding the way you are organized, whether for a particular type of manufacturing, you need to be outside the city, in the city, whether you need to, in a production floor, fully air conditioned or not, whether a particular equipment needs air conditioned or not, whether a particular product needs to be stored in a cold storage. There are so many other areas that we need to look at in a capacity or production management. And when you say operations management, it's also about production management, marketing management. It's all about how you complete your operations from the time you get the input and the time you get the output out. So people in the operations team typically are people, we use the word operations in close connection to how a war is fought. So typically during the Second World War, this term operations came from how strategies are developed during a war. While you have a certain game plan, you know that you will have so many number of people guarding or put up in a particular location. You will wait for certain triggers to fire or to defend. You will possibly have an option or a choice of instruction that could come from the top, from your leader, whoever the leader is, and so many. Having said that, it is very difficult to predict what could actually happen. So you are always at the point of taking decisions depending on what happens around you and what you have. And if you see some of the war movies, an excellent example of how they overcome different situations when they anticipate something and something else happen, and then you see that they quickly change their course. They They reduce people, increase people, divert people, add more people. They decide not to go for a offensive, and they sometimes hide. So many other things. So in modern day corporate world, operations is all about the constraints, the limitations, the resources that you have, which are primarily not limitless, and how you work around it, how you make sure you get the best of it. Having given you a lot of money, you can always produce the best product. If I give you more people than what you need, you can always produce a product better than iPhone, or better than a Mac, or better than probably a Boeing aircraft, for example, or anything else that you can possibly see. But the beauty or the fun is in the fact that how do you use the resources optimally? Do you want to sell a car at 20 lakhs, or maybe 2 crores? Do you have a customer for 2 crores? You may have, but how many of them? And do people really see value in buying something for 2 crores with only limited amount of features? So putting all this together is a very interesting activity. Typically, what also happens in today's world is, as you work towards operations, you also know how your production process works. So moving on to marketing, I'll quickly run through another few of them. I think we are almost close to the end of the presentation, but so marketing talks about environmental analysis, we talk about internal, external environment, we talk about markets, cultures, government, regulations, customer taste, very important. We never know when a customer thinks this is useless. Very interestingly, there is a very powerful quote that I think one of the gurus of marketing had said. I think it's Philip Kotler. Is many times customers, if they don't like, they don't go and tell the manufacturer. They don't go and tell the retailer. They simply walk out into a new product or a new brand. 9 out of 10 customers will simply sell, dispose, switch on to another service or product. So you don't know. Today in customer lifecycle management, you're trying to find out whether you know what the customer is doing. After he's got your product, you're trying to keep in touch with him to see whether he's happy or not with it. But traditionally what happens is, in marketing, it's very important to understand. It's important to see whether marketing actually creates a need. And fundamentally the difference between marketing and sales, I mean, both are interchangeably used, and I've also used it just for simplicity, is marketing is creating the need. It is trying to associate somebody's need with the product that you want to manufacture. It is something that you want to bring in that value, saying, okay, now you've married, now you've got a family, it is time to go for a car. You see those ads, campaigns, promotions. When you talk about compact car, they say it's now time to move from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 because your family is increased. You can go for a compact car. The difference between a two-wheeler, a good two-wheeler today, is and to a small size car, maybe a couple of lakhs. That's it. And there are ways and means to get it. So marketing is all about creating the need. Marketing today happens in a very different way. Social marketing happens today. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and so many other social media platforms promote a lot of marketing. And people, because they are glued on to it, they are constantly seeing it, they're constantly actively involved in it. They do influence or get influenced by this marketing. Okay, moving on. Further on to marketing in terms of planning and mix. So of course, it's important to know what. So before I move on, am I audible, clear? Any questions? Am I fast, slow? Do I need to give you a little bit more example? I'm running out of time because I think it's a very vast area that I'm to cover, and possibly I don't want to run beyond a few minutes from the scheduled time. But any questions or any thoughts, any views? Okay, perfect. Let's quickly go on. So again, going on to marketing mix, is all about how do you segment your customers? How do you know who needs what? How do you know who will probably buy what kind of items, what kind of products? And it's also about research, about forecasting. It's also about understanding whether it's the right time to invest, it is the right time to diversify, is it the right time to divest as well? So you are in a particular line of business, you need to know whether you are at the end of a particular life cycle. So we'll talk about when we get into V1, the product life cycle. So there is a growth phase, there's a maturity phase, there's a decline phase. Typically what happens is that happens in everything. It happens in a system implementation, it happens in a marketing, it happens in many other areas where there is always different stages of growth and maturity. And for some reason, if things don't work, certain products go into decline and only to be regenerated or reinvented into a different line. So a good example, I would say, not that it was declined, but with the onslaught of so many other automobiles in the country, in India, you saw the flagship brand of Hyundai in the 90s, mid 90s. Somewhere they moved on from Santro to other areas, and if you see today, Santro is relaunched again. Now, same happened with Maruti Suzuki or Suzuki India Limited a year back, because they brought in their Baleno again. Of all the Maruti brands, I was a Maruti customer some time back. The Baleno was the biggest failure. A brand that didn't last even a year. But the relaunched brand after almost 10 years is fairly successful. Now, I do not know what went behind the thought of going back for the same Baleno again. There must have been some reasons. There must have been some logic behind why they want to relaunch a brand in the name of Baleno. They could have chosen any other name. Similarly happening for Santro. Santro was not bad. I mean, it was very successful. But there was a stage when there were other similar cars from other brands. And somewhere Santro got into other i10, i20, and so many other similar segment cars. So what I'm trying to say is that the need to divest, ramp down, or probably start in a different market. Good example is Suzuki India. Suzuki is manufactured in India today, a lot of cars only to export to other parts of the world. I'm not sure if you know this, but the A-Star, which was not a very successful Suzuki brand, runs very good in African countries. It is one of the most successful brands in African countries. So we talked about this Ritz, A-Star, and then WagonR and those cars in the mid 2000, late 2000. If you look at those cars, some of those cars didn't go well, but A-Star was relaunched in Africa as one of the, I would say, sedan type of a car. So it is very successful as well. So these two things happen because you never know what the customer was thinking at that point in time. The choices the customer had when A-Star was launched was very different in India, because you had the likes of Renault, Nissan, Toyotas, and everybody else. You had the Etios, you had the Sunny. There's so many other cars in the 5 to 8 lakh segment that somewhere people said, it's enough with Maruti Suzuki and Suzuki India now. Let's move on to something different. Maybe I'll bring in a Japanese technology. Maybe I'm seeing difference in a German technology. Maybe I'm seeing something different from some other country. So customer tastes keep changing. So it's important to have constant planning and research the market. See what the customer thinks. Why is he looking at moving into a car? So different car, a different brand. A lot of companies today are trying to do buyback. They're saying, you have a Maruti brand, give it to us. We have a different Maruti for you, or a different Suzuki for you. You see that across all. Alto moved into WagonR, into something else, and probably today into a different car like Brezza and all that, as people have their capability to buy expensive cars. Moving on. Of course, we talked about marketing from a B2B, B2C. We know how this works. We know the requirement of a business is different versus a customer. Sometimes it's easy to work with businesses because you have a very clear direct interface. You know what is not working, but customers are spread across. In many cases, you have a lot of channel marketers or middlemen. You have people who are service centers, authorized distributors. Distributors are dealers. Sometimes the information from the customer right up to the person who's making a decision in a manufacturing setup in a company is not that clear. Sometimes it gets lost in the transit. So there are different aspects to it, but again, customers are important as well from individuals, because those customers are again people who are actually going to be promoters of your business. So if you sell to a business, you will get repeat orders. But from a brand perspective, how many of you know what kind of accessories are sold to Nokia or to Samsung or to Apple today from a manufacturer? It's between two businesses. End of the day, yeah, you will still know that there are 5 or 10 companies which are famous in manufacturing certain accessories to a bigger brand like Nokia or Samsung. But end of the day, the brand is not known. But if it goes to end customers, the brand value is there. And of course, marketing also happens on social grounds. I was very surprised to know a couple of years back when I read a study that as compared to what we normally think, the largest number of two-wheelers sold in the country is in the villages. And these are primarily the Hero Honda and then the Hero Corporation after the splitting of parting of ways between the Honda Corporation and the Hero Motors of India. So sometimes we feel that cities have the large number of two-wheelers, but if you see the biggest sale for Honda, because that was the area where Honda felt that will go to Hero, and it indeed happened. Today, if you see a lot of two-wheelers coming from the Hero Motor Corp stable for the villages, not the Honda comparatively. Okay, moving on. Human resource, an important function. Typically, it's all about people. It's all about how people are brought in, how they contribute, how do they exhibit their skills, whether we have people in line with the roles it's supposed to play. Organizations are also extremely dependent on how people operate. So we talked about culture, we talked about capabilities and so on, but an organization is made up of people. Even if you're talking about virtual organizations, people here does not physically mean physical people working in an office setup. So it's important to hire the right talent, to make sure that people are adequately motivated, trained. There are different strategies in bringing in people. Today, 20 years back, if you are a fresher, you are a curse. You would never get a job. Possibly you will have to somehow go into a company that you may not like, spend at least a year or two to get some kind of what they call experience at those days, and then get into a decent or a reasonable organization. Today, the freshers or people coming fresh out of college or business schools are the most sought after, because the question is all about that experience that we are bringing in today, we were bringing in yesterday, can be basically documented and brought into processes and procedures, and can be trained to somebody who has no idea about how corporate life is. Today we have systems, training materials, training environments, videos, lectures, and so many SOPs or standard operating procedures to basically help people understand what needs to be done. And we don't need to rely on experience. Experience is useful in certain roles, in certain functions, at certain stages when decision making is important. But for the most part, it is not required. Similarly, there are a lot of change in strategy in terms of how workplaces, as I told you, that there are certain companies where they today have a very different dress code. The way they start their work, the way they finish their work, there is a mandatory monthly party. Everybody has to attend. Every year they get a partly sponsored, abroad vacation trip. It's like there are different reasons why people want to work today. I think the reasons why we wanted to work a few years back was A, to have a career, B, to have a decent sum of money. But today, people want to work because they want to have a good time. They want to socialize. Of course, they want to build their career. They want to earn money. But the reasons why people get into an organization or a corporate life today is slightly different than how it was in the past. For people like us, so I have a large team of people. For people like us, it is a constant challenge to understand what people really want. What I think they want and what they actually want sometimes can be very different. And we are constantly looking at, I would use the word upgrading, but it's not actually upgrading, but constantly looking at being up to date in terms of understanding their needs. It is no useful for them if they look up to me and say, you got 20 years, you've done so many things, you have experience, and fine. It's good, it's a starting point. But beyond that, as a leader, as a person with so many years of experience, what am I giving them? What am I giving to the team? What am I contributing? How can I keep them engaged? How can I build their careers? How can I help them understand what is required to grow in the company? So HR looks at all these areas. They are, of course, there are routine processes of entry, exit, induction, and so on. Similarly, there are processes where there are appraisal reviews, there are training, there are competency assessment where somebody is assessed for whether they are scalable for the next role or for promotion in the future, and so many other things that HR is responsible for. It's all the people dimension of it, but it is more than that. It is not about processes and procedures and policies. It is more than that. It is about whether they are able to bring in the potential people have, whether they are able to eliminate the barriers people have in terms of being creative, being expressive, whether there are concerns that they can help them address, whether there are areas that they can channelize them or give them directions on, and so on. So typically the role of each of the functions in a digitized world is also changing. And that's where I think as you go through the materials, as you go through the course, you'll also see a lot of attempt has been put to make it very relevant today. The examples that we are talking about or what you would read in a textbook also revolves around what you see today, absolutely today. And it's important for us when we do something like CIMA or ACCA is to see what is actually happening. How close is what I'm reading to what is actually happening outside. So which means that you need to constantly read about what's happening around us and strongly link it back to, okay, if I'm working for a company. So is my HR function organized differently? Is my structure tall? Is my company into offshoring? Does my company focus on marketing? What kind of products do we heavily promote and why? Not because the CEO likes it, because that's where you get revenue, and that's where customers are looking at high demand as well. So these are areas that as a company we need to keep looking at it as an employee, because it becomes very easy for us when we relate things to what we study. And somewhere I feel there's an area that sometimes we lack. We are very theoretical, we look at certain things, but we can't. It's very simple that everything that we read and understand is very practical today, thanks to the internet and the technology around us. Good, I stop here. Any questions, any thoughts? I'm sorry for running over a little bit, but I guess it is a little bit of interest on covering certain areas with examples that probably help some of you. Any questions, any thoughts, any different opinion, any disagreements, any different views? Feel free to please let me know.
Any query anybody has, please communicate. Anything you want to know which was not discussed or any query, please communicate. Jack, Mayuri, Indranil, Sobhit.
So I'm hoping that when I was talking, you were listening to me.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Any different views? Anything that you feel that you're not really convinced about or not clear about? See, one important thing that we all need to understand here is we are trying to link theoretical or academic side to a practical side. So the session is to basically share experiences of what we've seen, that is read in the books. So there could be areas where certain things are looked at differently by you than the way we look at it. So always when you are in a class, feel free to share your thoughts so that we are able to understand how relevant that you are seeing all these topics to be.
Ganesh, your video is not coming.
Sorry?
Your video is not coming.
I do not know. Just a moment. Yeah, okay. Can you see me now?
No. One second. Yeah, can't see.
Okay. I can see myself as normal.
Not a problem. I just want to say that we have second session tomorrow also in the morning at 10 a.m. And with that we can keep it slightly longer, say 2 hours, 10 to 11:30 we will have the session, and then 11:30 to 12 o'clock whatever the student wants to say, whatever they want to communicate, because that will be fine for everybody, so that you will be able to communicate in 2 classes whatever you want. Yeah, now we can see you.
Okay.
What's the point of view others? Mayuri, Jack, Radhishyam, Anil, Aisa, Rajan, because we have the another session tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, which will be running till 11:30. Then 11:30 to 12 o'clock, we can have a doubt session or whatever queries we have. Is it okay with all of you? Yeah. So not a problem. Thank you, Ganesh, for giving us your time. And you can say, I can say that when I was here, I was totally hearing 1.5 hours. And I can say that it was a fantastic session, correlating all the concepts with the practical examples, because you have that expertise which we are using in the class. So I was fully satisfied, you can say, whatever you were saying. The most of the topics were revised, and maybe those are not exactly relevant for, you can say, a strategic level student, somebody will say. But as a strategic level student, there are 3-4 students here. You know that we are doing the pharmaceutical company. All these concepts are relevant when we are writing our answer. So I mean to say that maybe you are a CIMA student or ACC or anybody. It's 100% relevant in your syllabus. And when you will understand these concepts, you can score much more marks than what you can think. At the same time, the practical side also is also very relevant. So thank you for giving your time, and we will again take your time tomorrow, and then whatever doubts we have, we will be discussing between 11:30 to 12. Okay for everybody? And Ganesh, you?
Perfect.
Yeah. So we are leaving for today. We will be meeting tomorrow at 10. I will be giving you link, all of you.